Do you believe only native inhabitants of Guam or the Chamorro people should vote in a political
First, I want to thank you all for being with us today. Josh and I wouldn't be here without your friendship and your support. Especially the campaign supporters in every village throughout the island who have joined in our effort to keep Guam moving forward.
Our leadership has seen our people through the most frightening pandemic that our generation has ever seen. And it is about to see the most vibrant comeback of an economy in the most developed island here in the Western Pacific.
With your help and your vote, we will move forward as one people. And Josh and I will always be there for every single person and family on Guam.
Leon-Guerrero, and I approve this message.
Hello everybody, I'm Ken Leon-Guerrero and welcome to My Point of View. Today we're talking about people power in the year 2022. Now, the reason I decided to talk about this today is yesterday I got some good news, bad news. As you may or may not know, I've been battling this administration over the Guam Regional Medical Center Welfare Act, which gutted Guam Memorial Hospital financially, cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. And the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court and received a notice from the Supreme Court, go ahead and bring it up, that the government or the Supreme Court has kind of given me a mixed ruling. They sided with the government, they dismissed my case, but they confirmed that as a taxpayer I do have standing. There are technical reasons why they dismissed my case. I'm not sure I agree with the technical reasons. I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk with my attorney, but I will, and then we will do a show on the technical reasons why my case against the Department of Administration has been tossed. But at least one thing I am encouraged by is at least they did confirm that taxpayers do have standing, so thank God for that. But as I was sharing this incident yesterday, someone asked me why I do this. Why do I put myself through all this headache and aggravation, and why I work so hard at things that do not benefit me directly? And the answer to that is we have to look no further than what is taking place in the Ukraine. Because right now there's about 12 million people on the move in the Ukraine that have either lost their homes or they've had to flee the country because of the war in the Ukraine. Now, what does that have to do with Guam? What we're seeing here is the people in the Ukraine are going through a very, very high stress time right now, and their lives are being changed forever. And that's kind of what we're going through here on Guam, but not quite as intense. I mean, yes, we have both Russia, China, and South Korea threatening to nuke Guam, but they've been threatening to do that ever since I was a little kid and we learned how to duck and cover, you know. So I'm not so much worried about that as I am worried about the other things. But going back to her original question, Why do I do this? And I do this out of a sense of obligation to respect the people that came before me. Because who I am today is a result of people who came before me and did hard work. And I'm talking about really hard work. We talk about the people coming out of World War II here on Guam. I'm talking about my mother's side of the family that came out of World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression. You know, so there's been a lot of hard work done by our elders that brought us to where we are. So in this day and this time, we literally are standing on the shoulders of giants. At least that's what you have to believe if you listen to the politicians who, while on stage wandering around, ramble about how they're paying homage to the greatest generation ever. I submit the greatest generation ever is the one that's coming up, because the generation that's coming up is going to do more things. They're going to be doing things we can't even imagine. Because at the time I was born, my mother's family still lived on a farm in Iowa. We didn't have running water. We had a pump. We had an indoor toilet and some indoor water, but we still had the outhouse. And so in my mother's lifetime, she went from well water and outhouses and kerosene lights to fax machines, the internet, and landing on the moon. So that's why I say the upcoming generation is going to be the greatest generation ever. But why do I work so hard as a community advocate? It goes back to a saying that I've heard many times in my life. If not me, who? If not now, when? It's very easy for us to let George do it, I believe is the popular saying. But we are the ones that are going to make things happen. And all we have to look back is just back 60 years ago. There were people who were fighting for civil rights. And there were two levels. There were boots on the ground, literally boots on the ground. And then there were those who were talking about it. But the people that brought about civil rights were those who did something about it. And what they did is volunteers went in, and using Mississippi as an example, in 1963, at the beginning of 1963, there were 4 million people registered to vote in Mississippi. By the end of 1963, there were 12 million people registered to vote. And that's what it's going to take for us to help make a difference in the lives of the next greatest generation. If not me, who? If not now, when? It's up to us, because all we have to do is look back at Vietnam. And during the Vietnam, there were a lot of people who walked around and talked about doing something. Burning draft cards did not end the Vietnam War. Protesting did not end the Vietnam War. What ended the Vietnam War is when the hippies, and I'm one of them, went out and registered people to vote, and they voted for candidates who ran on a campaign that they would end the Vietnam War, and they did. It's the same thing with women's rights. Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, women's rights were a big deal. And there were those who talked about it, but no amount of burning the bras got women the rights that they were campaigning for. It was registering and voting. And it's just in the United States. Back in the 70s, you know, the mothers and grandmothers of all the missing children in Argentina would parade every day at noon in the plaza And in time, their actions brought down the dictator. We only have to look in our neighborhood back in the 70s and 80s, you know, the protesting that took place during the Marcos regime. And then in time, Marcos's regime fell. In Libya, we saw the same thing with Gaddafi. And just recently, we saw people power rise in South Korea. But we are the originals here. Back in 1776, a group of citizens got together and said, basically, we're as mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. They organized and they sent a petition to the King of England. Now just imagine the balls these people had. A group of people living on the edge of civilization, banding together and sending a petition to the king of the greatest power on earth, telling him, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore. And that's where we come from. That's the kind of people we are. So when we look back at how this society is supposed to work, we, the citizens, we organize, we try to hold those we put in power with our votes under the consent of the govern clause of the Declaration of Independence, and we try to manage them. But what has happened is our politicians have gotten so used to a certain level of apathy on the part of voters that they don't pay any attention to us. All we have to do is look back at 2020 when the Business Community Action PAC interviewed candidates for office. And in the end, they endorsed 10 Republicans and 2 Democrats. But what is more telling about the state of professional politicians is this. 50% of all candidates made the effort to fill out the questionnaire. And out of that 50%, 73% of those were the new candidates. So it showed that new candidates still believe they can make a difference. They're still trying to impress us, whereas only 27% of the incumbents made the effort to impress us. And what is even more telling is that out of those candidates that responded, 73% of them were Republicans and 27 of them were Democrats. Now the reason why this is so important is because there is a saying that I used to use all the time when I was a consultant, that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's true. But what we have in our political system here on Guam, we have a class of professional politicians who believe serving the political party is more important than serving the people of Guam. And we saw that back in 2016 when Mike St. Nicholas refused to sign the loyalty pledge and the Democrats were on the verge of throwing him out of the party. We see it now when the Democratic Party was throwing a temper tantrum and tried to pull out of the primary election so that they could have more control over who they allowed to run for office. A rising tide lifts all boats. And that is why we need to start looking at newer candidates, because right now, in spite of all the politicians who campaigned starting back in 2017 to eliminate the business privilege tax. Remember, it was passed in 2017. It was only supposed to last 6 months, and here we are now 5 years later, and we still have a 5% business privilege tax. That's because we have a group of politicians who do not believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. At least they don't act that way. Here we are. It's so expensive to live here now that everybody watching this show today knows someone who left this island, has a family member who has left this island, and may even be considering leaving the island now. And I know because over the past week I've talked to 2 more people who are in the process of getting ready to move to the mainland. And every time they move, our island suffers. So that's where we have to change things. This is the Guam Election Commission website. I'm pleased to see that as of yesterday, there were 52,209 voters registered. But technically speaking, based on the 2020 census, we should be somewhere around 69,000 registered voters. If we are going to do a good job making this place a better place to live for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. I know I talk about this a lot, but it's kind of important things to do, because if we don't do it, who will? If we as citizens do not engage in the process, we're leaving it to professional politicians. And as we have seen over the past 2 years, the professional politicians don't really care about our health, safety, and welfare. They don't care about our physical security or our financial security as much as they do theirs and politically well-connected insiders. How else can we explain when they shut down the entire economy and closed down government of Guam, they continued to pay government of Guam paychecks? You see, that is telling right there. I know a lot of people who work for government of Guam who would have been better off if they'd gotten the PUA money, but that wasn't the way the cards were dealt. What we have to do here is recognize that if this island is going to improve, we've got to take the tools out of the hands of professional politicians and hold them in our hands. And I'll try not to do this every week, but I encourage every one of you to go to the Guam Election Commission website, download this PDF, look at the list of candidates there, and every one of their campaign cell phone numbers and campaign email addresses are listed there. If we don't call them and we don't ask them hard questions, then we're going to be making our decisions based on who was able to raise enough money to run a glitzy ad campaign. And as we've seen over the past 2 years, while we were waiting in lines for food or waiting in lines for our all-rise checks or just waiting in lines, period, for gas or to be allowed into stores that only allowed so many people in, we know that we have to do better, because this is not the end of the pandemic. And there's going to be more pandemics coming. And yet here we are. On one hand, we're still in a state of public health care emergency, and at the same time, at the same weekend that the public health care emergency was declared, the political parties were holding mass meetings all around the island. You see, they didn't square that circle very well. If we're in a pandemic worthy of a public health emergency that restricts our freedoms and liberties, then at least the governor and the government should act like it. But this is an election year. That's why all the pay raises are coming out by executive order. That's why the checks are coming out. So instead of actually doing anything, they're trying to buy our votes. Don't let them do that. Make phone calls and find out what these people really believe beyond their advertising campaign. And never doubt for a moment that a group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead, anthropologist. I loved that quote when I first read it, and it's been one of my North Star quotes. I've got a lot of them, but that's one of my favorites right there. Because when we look back, a very small group of citizens banded together, standing out in the fringes of the wilderness back in 1776, and took on the greatest superpower on earth and won. If they could do that then we can do this now. So the way we do this is contact Guam Election Commission, call them, or go online and verify that you are registered to vote. I know a lot of people have done this and were surprised when they found out they weren't registered to vote. As a candidate, I had almost 40% of my signatures invalidated because I had almost 400 people sign my petition, and I had to go back out and get more because 156 of the signatures were invalidated. So the most powerful tool for change that has ever been created, more powerful than the internet, more powerful than electricity, more powerful than the telephone and television, is the right to vote. And ever since we have gotten the right to vote and used it wisely, that is what has made this country great. So, in closing, I leave you with this thought. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. We've gone through a hell of a year. And there are a lot of politicians out there who didn't serve the public interest well and are running for re-election. We need to hold them accountable. You need to hold them accountable, starting with a phone call or a letter. I've gotten a few phone calls, I've gotten a few letters, and I'm very happy, I'm honored to respond to the questions from voters. And you should be expecting the same sort of reception from those who are asking you to give them your vote so you can exercise power and spend money in your name. That's the least they can do. Now, in a homage to my history as a hippie, back in the 70s, there's a song that I used to play all the time off Steppenwolf. It's called Monster. And when you listen to this song and the lyrics, you can find it online. It's as true today as it was back in the 1970s. And look how far we have come since the 1970s to where we are today. And just think about where we can go tomorrow if we get this next election right. I'm Ken Leon-Guerrero with My Point of View, and I hope you guys take the time, as our forefathers did, to do your research to select the best people to help us move into the next year.
Do you believe only native inhabitants of Guam or the Chamorro people should vote in a political status plebiscite? Why or why not?
You know, political status is a very serious, I think, a movement for government to do. We have not been given the opportunity to determine our political status. Other people have. And I support, and I have made it public, that I feel it should be just for native inhabitants, because then it really is a self-determination of our own native inhabitants.